That was a nightmare. Everything flat. You have breeze and you have rain, and you never seen something like that.
The rich world has decades of emissions which are now contributing to severe weather events and disproportionately affecting developing countries who have contributed very little to global emissions.
As the systems come across our region, they're getting stronger, they're becoming more intense, and they're producing more damage.
As a government, we have to be responsible in terms of ensuring that we have the financial wherewithal to repair the damage once it's done. It's a massive undertaking.
The costs are increasing exponentially. Insurance can't save you from that.
There's a huge looming question for the world at large, which is how do you protect countries that are facing these disasters?
Major fires burning across Los Angeles.
Hurricane Beryl slamming Jamaica.
Devastation in East Africa. Weeks of heavy rains triggering massive flooding across the region.
Pretty much every week, there's a catastrophe in the headlines. Wildfires, very high hurricane speed winds. These are being stoked by various impacts from climate change. These are new elements that are really raising the risk and increasing the losses. The risk is unmanageable. There's a growing need for companies, but also for people who own homes to try and absorb these losses in a way that doesn't destroy anyone's financial situation. And catastrophe bonds are one such tool. Cat bonds were invented so that they could find a way to pass on the risk of these rare, crazy black swan events onto a different group of people who are willing to take the risk. In this case, it's Wall Street. Most of the cat bonds that are out there have to do with US risk, particularly California earthquakes and Florida hurricanes. But the World Bank has decided that this could be a way to provide some kind of insurance for hurricanes and other natural disasters in the poorer parts of the world. They've arranged over the last many years for some of these countries to issue their own cat bonds and pass on the risk of that potential event to Wall Street investors. It's perfectly straightforward for an insurance company in Florida to issue a cat bond. They know what the risk is. They know what the infrastructure is that could be damaged if a hurricane were to hit. But in a poor country like, say, Jamaica, there isn't that much infrastructure. And also, they just don't have a history of a lot of insurance and claims, just like you have in a place like Florida. So without a big insurance industry, how are you going to protect a country like Jamaica against a big cataclysmic hurricane?
As a country, we are situated in the hurricane belt. And when the hurricane hits us, it can hit us very hard and damages roads, infrastructure. It takes us out for a while. We have to prepare. For us in Jamaica, we implemented a catastrophe bond in 2021 for a 3-year period, and then we renegotiated another one that's in effect right now. Catastrophe bond will continue to form part of our disaster management financing efforts. The day the Met Office tells us that a very severe hurricane is on the way towards us, it's too late to do that kind of planning. So you have to do the planning well ahead of the eventuality of a catastrophe.
I was a child during Hurricane Gilbert. I could never forget, there was a lady who lived beside me and her roof just fell off. The roof just got up and went. And as a child, I was always interested to know why did the wind blow and why the roof of the lady had to come off the house. And as I got older, I recognized that meteorology, weather, was the science that allowed us to know about hurricanes. Across the island, we have a series of automatic weather stations and some manual stations that measure the different elements of weather. We have the 10-meter pole, and on this tower we have all the instruments and sensors that sample the atmosphere. So at the top, we have the wind sensors, and the wind sensors measures the wind speed and wind direction. We also have a station where we released an upper air balloon that samples the environment from the surface all the way up to about 200 millibars. So what we do know, what is our reality, is that the systems, especially hurricanes that move across our region, they're stronger, they're more intense, they're developing more rapidly. And as such, we are concerned about these systems and how they impact us in terms of our livelihoods, damage to property, and the loss of life.
When Hurricane Beryl came, one of the areas that was severely impacted was a community called Rocky Point in Clarendon. It's a fishing community, among other things, but a lot of homes are close to the ocean, and that obviously took a big hit.
Right. I live here 13 years, and I never had a hurricane when I live around here. Everything flat. Everything. The blow down house after the storm. Say, wow, Jesus. Some get help, but some don't get no help. They have to rebuild over back again. I don't get any help from the government. Not even a penny.
Traditional insurance would say after the damage, we have to come assess, and that takes time. And then you may or may not get a payout. Where the catastrophe bond comes in. It's a financial instrument that before the disaster happens, it describes certain parameters. And if those parameters play out, then there is a payout of that bond. The payout is almost immediate. Considering the intensity of it and the devastation that it caused, we were hoping for a payout. We were hoping that it would have met the criteria. Beryl did not meet the intensity that was described in the policy, and that's why there wasn't a payout.
Coming up with a cat bond is an incredibly complicated process. It's a heady mixture of science and historical data about storms and various formulae and also simulations of synthetic storms. The first step is to actually structure the bond. In the case of Jamaica, this meant dividing the country into 19 different cells. Each cell had a different threshold based on the historical patterns for when a cat bond would get triggered, depending on the speed of the hurricane as it entered or left that particular cell. The modeling for the Jamaica cat bond was done by a company called Veris. They have a team of people who are familiar with the science of hurricanes, and they have the ability to create synthetic storms on a computer that can capture some of the risk of potential events that could occur. Using that information, they can calculate what the risk of loss is for that cat bond. And then the insurance company can use that information to price the bond accordingly so that investors are attracted to it.
What a catastrophe model is trying to answer is really three fundamental questions. Where do these catastrophes occur? How often would they occur? And if they occur, what are the financial impacts from them? We have models covering more than 110 countries. In the case of catastrophes, there's nothing theoretical that we can compute with pure mathematics. Because it's so complicated, we have to go through this elaborate process of rolling the hurricane dice 10,000 times. And now we compute, convert them into losses, and now we can do the counting that, oh, how many times did it exceed 50 billion? How many times did it exceed 100 billion? It's literally billions of calculations are happening behind the scenes. A catastrophe bond is essentially an insurance instrument where risk is being exchanged between two parties. What our models are really trying to do is to kind of be the fair arbiter between these two parties to provide a view of risk and quantification of the risk so that now these two parties can get together and comfortably come to an agreement and what is the right price to exchange that risk.
There is a sense of injustice if you are the country that didn't get a payout when a big disaster hit. But at the same time, you're seeing that people who bought your cat bond, investors on Wall Street and elsewhere, they're making returns that are in the double digits. In 2023, the most successful, best performing hedge fund strategy was to invest in cat bonds. It gave you 20% returns. In 2024, the returns were 17%. Those are very high paybacks for a fixed income instrument. It's not usual that bonds pay out quite like that. I think a lot of critics would say that the risk-reward curve is in favor of investors today. The reason is that they are demanding that the threshold at which the cat bond gets triggered, which means they lose money, keeps rising. So it takes a much bigger disaster, takes a much larger loss for the cat bond investor to actually shell out and pay for the claims.
Where there is uncertainty and where this risk is increasing, exactly like climate change and some of the new health risks, the investor's going to say, well, I don't know what's happening with the underlying. The underlying is changing, and therefore I need to build in a sort of risk buffer for the uncertainty of this event. In a world of uncertainty, the cat bond's going to favor the investor more.
It's not safe.
When you're dealing with a catastrophe, that is a big event that happens in a very infrequent space of time, then catastrophe insurance, catastrophe bonds, these are good things because you need to spread out the payments. The challenge is climate, because climate is not a one event every 10 years. Imagine you have car accidents now, instead of once every 10 years, it's now once a year, and then it becomes twice a year, and then 3 times a year. The benefits of spreading out the payments no longer helps too much, and that's why some countries are finding it a problem. These bonds that they issued before are just not paying out as much as they hoped for, even though they're paying in considerable sums of money.
So what can countries in the developing world do to shore up their resources, to increase their resilience when large disasters strike? The most appropriate solution, a lot of people say, is to find ways to finance better infrastructure, better roads, better bridges, and ensure that seawalls are built in areas where the sea level is rising and threatening to flood island nations. Now, there are other forms of insurance that countries can use beyond cat bonds. For example, the Inter-American Development Bank is enthusiastic about climate-resilient disaster clauses. This is a way for a country to postpone debt payments after a disaster hits, so that it has time to recover financially.
Imagine if every single debt instrument, all your mortgages, all of your car loans, all had climate-resilient disaster clauses in them. And then whenever a disaster happens, you could suspend the payments and pay it back, so you could reshuffle the payments to pay things when you are able to and to be released from paying them when you're least able to. That would make the whole financial system more adaptive, more absorbing for these big risks, more flexible, more shock absorbing. And that was the objective. And that's what we need to do. Unfortunately, cat bonds don't do that.
The World Bank has issued about 15 weather-related catastrophe bonds since 2009. There is about $1.5 billion worth of World Bank cat bonds outstanding in the market right now, but the bank has high ambitions. It wants to issue another $3.5 billion worth of cat bonds over the next 4 years. Cat bond issuance in 2024 hit a record level. There's a reason for that. That's because the scale, size, intensity, and losses from these natural catastrophes around the world, especially in the US, are really increasing at a very high rate. And so the insurance industry, homeowners, governments all need to figure out a way to ward off this problem. Otherwise, the losses will only keep getting out of hand.